What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place to discuss all public information-related topics for police, fire, EMS, and local and federal government organizations.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose. And when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
This episode is sponsored by the Social Media Strategy Summit, the leading provider of social media education. They host annual events designed specifically for government communications professionals like you to help you build and engage your communities through social media. Visit their website at socialmediastrategiessummit.com to learn more and use promo code PIO Podcast for 10% off of your registration. Today we continue our series featuring presentations and interviews from the 2022 National Information Officers Association Annual Training Conference. Our guest host for these episodes is Ed Bice, a former NIOA president and the Senior Public Affairs Officer at NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Robert, thanks again for the opportunity to share highlights from the 2022 NIOA conference. If you're a PIO, are you ready for a potentially catastrophic event like a tornado or hurricane? You'll learn some of the things you need to plan for to get ready on this episode of the PIO Podcast.
The year before, I boarded up my house 4 times, but this was the first time that I was really concerned and worried.
That's Brennan Mattherne, the PIO in Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. His community got walloped by Hurricane Ida, August 29th, 2021. Ironically, it was exactly 1 year to the day later that Brennan was sharing the lessons he learned from Ida. Even if you're a PIO somewhere that hurricanes are unlikely, there are still a lot of takeaways to be learned from those like Brennan who have been through a lot of storms. We'll jump into his presentation a little ways into it, after he showed a video of his agency's first news conference after Ida came ashore.
So that was the first press conference that we did after Ida, and you saw it took place 4 days after the storm. Obviously, as a PIO, I would have wanted to do it as soon as possible. That was as soon as possible. Logistically speaking, it was very tough. It would have been tough to get reporters there. It would have been tough. We had very few resources as far as internet and cell phone, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that was the first opportunity that we really had to be able to talk to the media. And we did a lot of things in between that. So just some quick stats. Hurricane Ida made landfall, like I said, at noon, major category 4. They say the winds were 150 miles per hour. We feel like they were a lot faster. We had instruments at Port Fourchon. A boat captured a wind gust of up to 227 miles per hour. But based on that wind speed at landfall, it was tied with Laura, as well as several others, for the 5th strongest hurricane to hit the United States based on wind speed at landfall. So this was one for the history books. Miraculously, there were 0 deaths in Lafourche Parish. Now, as PIO for the Sheriff's Office, I would love to think that that was because of our messaging to tell people to get out and, how to control their generators and make sure that they're not getting carbon monoxide poisoning after. But maybe that had something to do with it. But I really attribute it to the responsible people in our community. So I'll talk about the things I did before the event. But again, I tried to present this for any incident. So really hope that you find some of this helpful with some of the lessons that we learned in this storm and some of the takeaways and a lot of the things that we applied from other presentations here at NIOA. The first thing you want to do is if you know, obviously if you have a disaster that comes out of nowhere, there's nothing you can do. But when, like a hurricane, you have warning. You have at least some time, even though it's a short time. So you want to make sure you position and prepare yourself. The most important thing was securing family and property, from the personal level. And ultimately, this was my first storm that I went through a lot of hurricanes, but this was my first storm that I had a mortgage, that I had a wife and 2 kids. So that was impactful for me. For the first time, the year before, I boarded up my house 4 times, but this was the first time that I was really concerned and worried. Obviously, all the grown-ups are worried. About the Thursday, so it made landfall the Sunday. About the Thursday, I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I immediately called my friend Bill Davis from Shreveport, which I met him here at NIOA. I mean, even though we're in Louisiana, we are in the farthest corners of each other. I'm in southeast Louisiana, he's in northwest Louisiana. So we met at NIOA, and we've become friends for almost a decade now. And my first question to him was, look, Bill, I got to send my family up to Bossier. I need you to tell me, I booked a hotel suite for them, for my wife and my in-laws. Please tell me this is in a good area. Does it have access to stuff? And Bill's response was, brother, they could come stay at my house. So that's the kind of friendships that we've built over the years. I appreciate Bill with the offer, but I didn't want to send my in-laws over there. So, so ultimately, I did send them to the hotel, and they stayed for about a week. Now, obviously, the grown-ups were very concerned and worried, but, if you have kids and you have to send them out, it's hard, right? I mean, I'm away from my kids this week, and it's hard. Not just my kids, my wife too, obviously, but the issue is that kids are resilient, right? I mean, they're gonna get over it. They're gonna view it as an adventure. My kids are no different. My daughter found it as a good nap time, that 5-hour drive to North Louisiana. And my son was 3 years old at the time, and he was just as shocked as anyone else that he found a good bowl of gumbo in Shreveport. But you want to find a location, a place that you're going to be safe. And most importantly for us in today's modern day, we have to make sure that we're going to have power as often as we can. You're going to need to make sure that you have internet access as long as we can. The port building that I was staying in, it turned out to be a good choice. They lost their roof, but they never even lost Wi-Fi connection. So I was able to ride that out and do Zoom interviews the next morning following this disaster, all because I made that right call of where to position myself. You have to take time to mentally prepare yourself, and I can't tell you how important that is. I highlighted the words life-altering storm. Benjamin Schott from the National Weather Service in New Orleans. That was a key moment for me. That was the moment it got real. I heard those words, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it. That changed everything for me. That's the moment that I thought about, man, is my house even going to be here after this? I live in the central area, and I was riding the storm out in the south area, and that was a real concern. And as it turned out, the eye actually did pass over my house. Thankfully, I was very blessed and did not have a ton of damage. But those are the type of things that you have to take time to mentally prepare yourself for. Crisis communication plans have been a hot topic at this conference the last couple of years, and this is that time before the event happens. Make sure you have that plan. Know it, or have it handy if you haven't read it for some reason. But this is the time to enact it. This is the big one, like Ashley said in the last presentation. This is the time to get ready. So that's all before the event. Well, during the storm, during your event that you have to deal with, you want to stay informed as much as possible. And this was a lesson that I learned because I didn't do that the right way. You have to be monitoring social media. While our deputies were off the road for nearly 20 hours. They were pulled off at 9:30 a.m. on the Sunday morning, and they did not go back on the road until 5 a.m. the following morning. The winds had died down, but there was no visibility and really no way to clear the roads in the pitch black at night. Not a safe way anyway. So ultimately, we pulled them off the road for 20 hours. But we were able to stay informed like that video because we saw other people on social media. While we didn't have cell service in the aftermath, we did still have it during the storm itself. So the video of the hospital was circulating, and people were sharing it. I wasn't monitoring social media like I should have been, but thankfully there was so many people in the office that they were kind of sharing, making sure I got all the information. On the right, whenever we have, part of our talking points, whenever we have a disaster, and a lot of you will know this, is you're trying to get people to evacuate. You have to tell them, there's going to be a period of time where emergency services can't get to you. The other thing I did later on Sunday in the afternoon into the evening, was I started lining up interviews for the next morning. It was Sunday night, so obviously we have Monday morning news. That's going to start at, 4 or 5 o'clock in New Orleans. So all of the major news networks are going to start calling. And of course, the national media, we're going to get those calls too. So as we started getting emails, and while we still had email, we went ahead and coordinated that and aligned up all that. So probably from about 5 a.m. to about 10 a.m., I was just jam-packed with interviews. And I really lost touch with the sheriff at some point. He was in the central area. They had, nothing, no kind of communication. So I just had to take it and run with it. And that's what I did the next morning. Another lesson learned for me, I lined up all those interviews and I was ready to go and I thought I had everything ready. But one thing I didn't do is take 5 or 10 minutes to walk outside the building and kind of look at the neighborhood and see for myself. Because ultimately that's a question that you're going to get asked, if not in every interview, every other one, is what are you seeing out there? When you go out, what are you seeing? So I would always have to start with, well, our deputies went out at 5 a.m. and they're seeing this, that, and that. I could never say, well, I took a walk outside and I'm seeing boats overturned in Bayou Lafourche. I'm seeing this or that. Look, we got a church with a hole in the roof here in the southern part. And it's tough to go down a street and see every home just completely wiped out, people's belongings and lives just scattered all over the yard. If I'd have just taken 5-10 minutes to walk outside, I could have seen these images and portrayed that emotion and those feelings when I was doing those interviews. But I was just so focused on getting the interviews done that I didn't think to do that. So lesson learned there. One of the biggest things that we had to do right after Ida, and that you may have a situation, especially if you have an evacuation, you have to redetermine your audience. You're not dealing with the same, we talk about the 95% and the 5%, our day-to-day versus the emergency. You're not dealing with the same circumstances that you have in that 95%. This is the 5%. And you don't even have most of your residents in parish. How are you communicating with them? How are you talking to them? That's the how. You have to figure out who first. So we had two big sectors of the society. We had our evacuees. They have internet access. They're in Houston, they're in Alabama, they're in Arkansas, wherever they're at. So they have internet access. What they don't have is maybe access to the local channels. They don't have access to New Orleans media, which they would be used to listening to. They also don't have access to, people on the ground because there's no communication back in our parish for most people because there was no cell phone service for a while. So ultimately, they're worried because they have questions like, when can I come back? Can I stay when I get back? What do I need to bring with me? What's available? Is there gas available? Are grocery stores open? So you have to think about these questions that you have to answer for that period. So again, social media works for these guys. A mobile app, if you have that, will work, and we use that. Email, any kind of electronic. You can use all your standard means of communication to communicate with those people. But what about the people at ground zero? What about the people that are still in the parish? Those who have stayed have zero way of getting information. There's no internet, no cell phone service, and no power. So how do you get them information? And their questions are much more basic than the people that evacuated. Their questions are like, can we drink the water? If we can get water in our tap, where can I find supplies at? How do I get information? And what do I do with debris? And while that seems premature, let me tell you, the day after a hurricane, or the moment after a hurricane, as soon as people can start getting out there and start cleaning up their yards, they absolutely will. And what you don't want is somebody that takes all day or all week cleaning up and puts a big pile of mixed debris, and then you got to tell them, well, now you've got to go out and separate it because we have instructions from our contractor. So you have to be thinking along those lines immediately after an event of how you're going to communicate that information. But as important as all those things are, and as PIOs, we would rate those first three things the most important. I can't tell you how important running water is until you don't have it. My wife called about the Wednesday or Thursday wondering, when can we come home? We've been out here for a few days. We'd really like to go see the house. When can we come home? And I had to say, babe, I don't think you understand. There's a bucket in our bathroom. Like, that's the situation we've got. It's tough during a storm or an emergency because when everybody else doesn't have power, you're at that office and you've got a generator and you've got power. But ultimately, the citizens don't. And so you're sitting there with power and you tend to forget what everybody's going through. But even at the offices, we didn't have running water, so we were in the same boat as everybody else. Ultimately, when you're in this situation, you have to decide, how are you going to get word to these people? You have to go back to basics. We saw Genevieve's video, yesterday with our officers going around with their loudspeaker messaging, making contact in the communities. That's a great way to do it. You're kind of reaching everybody, just repeating that message. That's certainly one way to get the message out there. Personal contact, going door to door with people. Credit our fire department, especially in the southern part of our parish. They assisted with that. Just going to make sure everybody's okay. So that's something that you may have to do. There may be nothing else you can do except literally try to make sure everybody's okay, check on people in the neighborhoods. One thing we did in about 2 or 3 days out, when we started getting more and more information, and it wasn't basic information, this was more detailed information, we had to resort to making flyers. It's primitive, but ultimately that's all we had. And at that point, our points of distribution, our pod sites, were starting to be set up. So that gave us a prime opportunity to locate those flyers at those sites. So when people picked up things like water and tarps and things like that, they could pick up those flyers so that they know about the burn ban and about the boil order for the water and things like that. Ultimately, this proved to be pretty successful, but it also led to a revelation for the future that, the parish is already putting plans ahead to create informational points. If you're a citizen and you have no way of communicating, that could be pretty scary. You have no cell phone, you have nobody to call in our society right now. That's a pretty scary thought that you'd have to literally leave your house. And then what if you can't because you have a tree in the middle of your road? So ultimately, that's the sort of thing that people were facing. But we feel like if we can put these points of information throughout the parish and educate people ahead of time, look, if all else fails and you have nothing else to go off of, go to this building or go to this site and get information. And we can still make the flyers and pass them out, but they can always get information at these sites. We tend to rest sometimes on, if we put something out on Facebook, everybody's going to read it. But everybody's not on Facebook. A lot of people are, but not everybody. And even if you put it out there, we don't know that they're getting it. So for us, a mobile app was sort of the next step beyond social media to make sure that we can reach our citizens directly. If you have a chance to get a mobile app, it's really helpful for that crowd that's not on social media, or even the crowd that is, because you can't view everything on social media. Other than these things, I did want to give one story. One of the first interviews I did after we heard in an earlier presentation, in Judy Powell's presentation, in fact, about turning skeptics with facts. Well, a guy called up the radio station and said, when we got the mobile app, he thought, oh, that's cool, but, they're probably not going to keep up with it, and it's probably going to become irrelevant. And he said, you know what? I have to say, I was wrong. This was awesome. I evacuated with my family to Texas, and we knew everything that was going on because of this app. So again, it works. We've had a lot of success with it, and I'd encourage you to at least consider it as part of your PIO toolbox. So a few more additional takeaways from the PIO standpoint. Network with your local PIOs. We've had a couple of people already talk about that. And man, that's something, I can't tell you how valuable this is. Probably back in 2014, I had I was having lunch almost monthly with the Thibodaux Police PIO. And we were realizing, man, maybe we should bring a few more people into this. And so we reached out to a few more PIOs, and we got them on board. And soon we had the Lafourche PIO group, a crazy name, I know. But look, we met monthly at first, and then it got to be quarterly. And ultimately, we really didn't talk a ton of shop, although obviously we did at some parts, especially about local media and social media. You don't talk a ton of shop all the time, but you know what you do is you form relationships. And when something like this happens, you need those relationships. You need to know who to call. You don't want to wait until a major event happens and wonder, well, who's the communications person at the university? Who's the communications people at the hospital? Who's the communications people for the utilities? You got to make sure you know all those people ahead of time. So just on this Zoom call, I can see DA's office, sheriff's office, a couple fire departments, Entergy, Nichols State University, Louisiana State Police, parish government, a couple people from parish government, Port Fourchon, the assessor's office, and our tourism department, all on this call before a storm, all part of our local PIO group, and that's about half the people that we have associated with this group. And not all 30 of us show up to every luncheon, but the point is we know each other, we're comfortable with each other, and we work really well together. The other message, like I pointed out on the video, the life-altering storm comment, I realized the National Weather Service followed up with us with a little event for some parish officials a little bit later after Laura, probably about 4 or 5 months. And it was at that meeting that I realized, man, the National Weather Service is a government entity. We don't think about that like they are, but they are a government entity. So the people that are talking, they're government communicators, just like we are, and they choose their words carefully, just like we do. So in hindsight, it was good that I took heed on the words life-altering storm, because some PIO somewhere sat down and thought about those very words to give to Benjamin Schott for him to talk about at that press conference. And they mentioned that, they don't use the word, they don't throw out words like catastrophic damage too often. So when you hear that, take note, because they're calculating their words just like we do. Kind of going along with complete loss of all communications, diversify your communications as much as possible. Don't rely on Facebook. Don't rely on Facebook and Twitter. Don't rely just on your email or your phone. Think about mobile app. Think about other ways that you can communicate with the public if other systems go down. You want to have a diverse system of communications as part of your plan. So this next slide or two, I want to talk about things that, in any emergency, and we've talked about this. I know Judy Powell's talked about this in previous slides. Just in a nature and in an interest of you being the smartest person in the room at your agency, here's a few ideas that maybe you can take away and maybe you can have and develop something on your end based on ideas that we had from this event. So first of all, and this, for a hurricane, this is obvious, right? You're going to get a ton of spare tires. I had somebody in a previous presentation, maybe 10 years ago, mentioned the cans of Fix-A-Flat that they went through for a storm. But that isn't as prevalent anymore. Some of the modern tires wouldn't really respond to that. So ultimately, we had, you saw the makeup of our parish. We couldn't have one. We had 3 mobile tire repair units that were just kind of traveling up and down the parish. Now, these were just for deputies. These were just for our deputies to be able to change those tires and make sure and get them back on the road, because our fleet operations was in the central part of the parish. If we had to wait for every unit to go to the central part to get a tire changed, they wouldn't have been in their communities very long, because with the amount of screws and nails and everything on the road, that would have taken them off the road. We had tons and tons of flat tires and tires that needed to be patched. So that's a cool idea that we had. We assigned 3 people from that fleet operations unit, again with a trustee, and they essentially were just going around responding to whenever a deputy's car went down with a flat tire. This was something I was just talking about at lunch. Someone asked, well, how do you deal with all of that stuff that comes in? How do you deal with all the people that come in that want to help? We actually had a logistics team that was put in place before this storm, but we had one point of contact, a logistics coordinator. That person's sole job was we funneled all the emails, all the phone calls, all the messages to that one person. And she got with the team and they arranged for meals, not just for the public, but for our deputies too. Wherever the hot meals are coming in, okay, well, we got a hot meal in Thibodaux, so we need to make sure we have one. We have another one, so let's send that to Golden Meadow. We have a truckload of supplies coming to the central area. Well, let's get this next truck to go to the south area. Otherwise, what you're going to get is people just showing up at your doorstep and just dropping stuff off wherever they can, and you just got to deal with it after. Well, you're trying to deal with the aftermath of a hurricane and looters and all the other stuff, so you really don't have time to do that as a sheriff's office, but neither does the parish or anyone else. So if you can assign one or a team of people to be that coordinator, then you can be ahead of the game. So when those requests come in, you can do it. Now, the thought process may be, well, the parish has one or the county has one, so we don't really need one. Yes, you do, because the calls aren't going to all go to the central agency. They're going to come to everywhere. You want to be prepared, and you have employees too. And look, there was a while, I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from. We didn't know when we were going to eat. We were hoping that one would be available, and we were hoping to find stuff, and we helped each other out. And ultimately, there was a lot of people popping up and cooking hot meals. But it was a day-by-day, meal-by-meal experiment for a while. So having that logistics coordinator helped that out, because then we got word out, hey, there's going to be a hot meal at this location at this time. This was an interesting one. So when you lose cell service, you don't have GPS on your phone. Can't get to maps. And when you have outside agencies coming in to help you, how do they know where to go? How do they know what the layout is? You tell them that you got a call on East 72nd Street. how do they even know where that is in where they are now? So again, we had that guy from the tourism office on our phone call. Now, we didn't think about this ahead of time. This is a lesson learned. But I called him up and said, hey, man, do y'all have any maps of the parish at the tourism office? And he's like, well, our tourism office is decimated. But thankfully, I was able to grab like 3 garbage bags. I stuffed a whole bunch of maps in some garbage bags just to get them out of there, and I have them. So do you want them? Sure, bring them on by. Credit, again, building those relationships. This guy waited in traffic, maybe about a 5-mile stretch for 5 hours because we had so many logistical problems in the roadway. He waited 5 hours to drive those maps to our EOC so that we can get them to deputies on the road. So that's the kind of response you can get when you build those relationships ahead of time. I wish I had better pictures of this, and I do apologize for that, but this was just one of the best things that we did. As an agency, we set up a general store for employees, and despite the store thing, it was all free. But based on all of those things that are coming in, and we got a lot of stuff to the public, obviously we knew that our deputies were in the same boat as many people in the public. They had lost their house, or their house was not livable at least. And so we needed to make sure that they had basic essentials. Some of them needed housing, and we had to try to find that. But we set up a general store in the northern area of our parish that had all of the basic essentials, basic things like toilet paper, shampoo, soap, all the things that the public would need, our deputies would need. So we kept a few for them. In the southern area, in my office, what happened was a Walgreens had kind of caved in one whole wall. And I stopped on the way, and I saw a truck out there for the first time since the storm, about a week after the storm. And I stopped and talked to the guy and said, hey, y'all are probably going to throw everything away in this store, so do you mind if we go get some stuff in there? And he's like, look, I don't care, but I've got to send that up. So it took a couple of days of coordinating, and after probably about a week, we finally got word from corporate, and they were like, look, we appreciate we appreciate what you guys are doing. No, you can't have anything in the store. So I accepted it. I was like, okay, well, whatever. And then the regional person that was on site, I stopped by to check on something else, and the regional person said, look, I don't care what corporate said. I'm making the call. Y'all go get whatever y'all need for y'all deputies. So we did. I grabbed 4 guys from the road, and we went in there with literally a shopping list, and one guy went supermarket sweep style on all the energy drinks and threw them in the cart. It was awesome. It was awesome. But we got a lot of provisions there, and I basically turned my office into our general store in the south area, stocked it full of all kinds of items from there. And then as we had trucks coming in, donations coming in, we just kind of added to it the whole time. And we were stocked probably until November. So from the end of August till November, my office was basically a makeshift store in the southern area of the parish. So that was a cool idea that kept everybody. And speaking of that note, you have to take care of your employees. That's the first and foremost. I showed you Sheriff Weber, and his first comments after the storm was directed at his employees. And even though a lot of them didn't hear it at that point, they're hearing it later, or at least they hear it today, because I put that same video on social media to commemorate the anniversary of Ida this morning. So they heard it today if they didn't hear it before. You have to take care of your employees. And again, this next list is not really PIO strictly, but I did play a role as PIO in trying to implement some of these things. So again, this is about you being the helpful person, the connected person, the smartest person in the room to help out. One of the things that we did was we tarped roofs of all of our deputies. We put together a team of deputies and some volunteers, and instead of expecting our guys from the road on their one day off that they might have in a month to go home and tarp their roof by themselves, we took care of every deputy's house that was impacted by the storm. We had our personnel major got on top of everything and reached out to every employee to make sure that they were okay, make sure that they didn't have any needs or, as far as their house. And this team went and tarped every deputy's house to make sure, including mine, to make sure that they were okay so that they didn't have to worry and stop work, or they didn't have to worry about that on their one day off. So speaking of that, you have to ensure days off. I'll talk a minute about getting other agencies involved. And that's going to be the way that you do it. But you have to give them a day off. And look, even as PIOs, we run on adrenaline all the time, especially in a major incident. This is the big one. So look, we're ready for it. This is what we've trained for. And we step up to the bar. But we also need a day off at some point too. And I took one at the earliest convenience. My family came in. I was able to spend it with them. And that helped me tremendously. So take a day off. I remember for Hurricane Katrina, which also is the anniversary today, 17 years ago, I remember I stayed up for 80 straight hours at one point. And I told somebody this story the other day. I spent 6 years at parish government as a PIO before I started at the sheriff's office. And April of 2005 was my first day in parish government. And 3 months later, we were hit with Katrina. And they were like, "Oh, Brennan, you have a radio background. We need to get information to the media. You're it." And so that's how I became a PIO. Baptism by fire. But in this case, I remember staying up 80 straight hours thinking, I just have to stay up. I have to get all this work done, running on pure adrenaline and energy drinks and caffeine, whatever I could. And I learned my lesson after that, after I crashed big time. And then in Gustav in 2008, we had another mandatory evacuation for that storm. And man, I was sleeping like a baby the first night because I remember how rough those 80 straight hours were. But you need a day off. You need to take time for yourself. We laxed our uniform policy. Anybody in here that is familiar with our sheriff, Craig Weber, he's been the NSA president. He's a former state trooper, and I know we have 5 of you guys in here, so we know you like to look good, and he's no different. He likes his Class A uniforms, and so we wear Class A uniforms almost all the time. If we're not, wearing a shirt and tie, and that's just it. There's no polos, no Class Bs. However, this was the most catastrophic event to hit Lafourche Parish. Now, this was a topic you don't even address with the sheriff. You don't talk about uniforms. You know better than that. Me and one of the majors got up the guts and said, "Look, Sheriff, I think our guys would be more comfortable." Well, first he asked, "Are you armed, Sheriff?" And he said, "No, I'm not." So then we proceeded to ask him about the BDUs, and he said, "Of course, yeah, whatever they want, that's fine." So take care of your employees. Look, even in Katrina, we had Class A uniforms, but this was different. This was the worst storm for us, and so we took care of them that way. We also made challenge coins. We limited it to one. We as a parish entity, we cannot purchase things to give away to the public or even to our deputies like that. So we had the Deputies Association pay for one coin for every single deputy, and then I was able to design this just on my own, and we got help through a third-party company that produced them for us pretty quickly. And we were able to get them out to one to every deputy. And we also gave them the opportunity to buy however many they wanted on their own. And these were like $3.23 a piece. So some bought, a couple extra. Some bought 5, 10, 15, 20. So again, it was an opportunity for them to purchase a nice memory from this. But they all got at least one for free. We also, in addition to at the time the sheriff presented each person with a coin. He also presented them with a uniform ribbon. Now, prior to this, there were some of us already wearing that ribbon. That was to symbolize who had been with the agency during Hurricane Katrina. It was one of the worst disasters we had under Sheriff Weber, and he wanted to commemorate it with a uniform ribbon. Well, we did it again for this storm. So everybody that had one of these ribbons from Katrina got a star on it, and every other deputy got the ribbon. So now, again, any deputy that's on the road that maybe didn't have any awards yet or hadn't been recognized, we thought that this event was big enough to recognize everybody. Instead of individuals for little things, we recognized everybody, and everybody got a ribbon for this. One of the biggest takeaways is, I'm telling you, assist other agencies whenever you get the opportunity. Our friends in Calcasieu, we helped them out for Laura. And look, we didn't have a lot of resources. I think we sent like 8 guys, and then we replaced them with 8 more guys. I think they sent what seemed like 200 Calcasieu deputies to help us after this one. But one of the cool moments was, I talked about Katrina a couple times. Like I said, we were in Katrina. That's our sheriff and a couple other deputies assisting some people in New Orleans. 17 years ago or 16 years ago from Ida it was, and we had NOPD came back and they returned the favor for Hurricane Ida. So it was awesome to see those guys come back in and be able to return the favor, even though 16 years later that we were affected. So on that note, these are all the agencies that assisted us. We had 12 sheriff's offices from Louisiana, 7 agencies from out of state. Look, we send our people everywhere. The sheriff involved with NSA, anytime that NSA call comes through. Look, we went to the Dakotas for the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. We send deputies wherever they're needed, even though it's a couple. This shows you the return on that investment. When you help other people out, they show up to help you. And some of these, like Calcasieu, was definitely our biggest help. But East Baton Rouge showed up again with a huge their mobile transport, mobile command vehicle, and they basically set up camp. They put up tents. They were cooking for our deputies. It was awesome. So all of these agencies really answered the call. Seminole County Sheriff in Florida. I don't know if anybody's in here from them, but look, your guys formed lasting bonds with our guys. They would talk about fishing. Florida and Louisiana obviously have a lot of similarities. Just awesome time for our deputies getting to know all these people from out of state. Our residents, despite all this, never lost their sense of humor. This guy was getting his mail no matter what. He found an ironing board and put his mailbox up there, and I think that speaks for itself. That was actually on Highway 1, our main drag for a long time, and nobody complained about it. One of the things you always need to remember, though, throughout any disaster is reporters, they're going to need help from time to time, too. So this was Fox 8 in New Orleans. They got a flat tire, and we got a great picture. We didn't share it on social media. Somebody from the public actually shared it, so that was even better because it didn't come from us. But that made the rounds pretty quickly that we were even taking care of the reporters. How about that? All right, so that's pretty much it. And like I said, I hope that a lot of you got something out of this, even though you may never have to deal with a hurricane. I hope that I was able to give you something to take back.
Go to NIOA.org. That's NIOA.org to learn more about the National Information Officers Association and to see if you qualify for membership in the premier organization for public safety information officers. In the final NIOA recap episode, we'll let you hear part of a dynamic presentation from Judy Powell, a media trainer, strategist, former PIO, and another past president of NIOA. That's coming up on the PIO Podcast.
Another huge thank you to the Social Media Strategies Summit for being a sponsor of the PIO Podcast. Join their First Responders Summit this April or their Government Summit this May. Learn more about confirmed speakers and programming at socialmediastrategiessummit.com and use promo code PIO Podcast for 10% off of your registration.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.